Welcome, everyone. You are here with us again for another episode of Mind Power Meets Mystic. My name is Michelle Walters. I am a hypnotherapist and the Mind Power part of our title. I am joined by my podcast pal, Cinthia Varkevisser. Cinthia Varkevisser is an intuitive healer, and she is our show mystic. We are very fortunate to have a highly esteemed guest today. Julie Marty-Pearson, Psych D, is a dynamic podcaster, speaker, and coach dedicated to empowering women and non-binary individuals to share their stories through podcasting. With a doctorate in organizational psychology and a background spanning over 15 years in higher education, Julie brings a unique blend of academic expertise, love of teaching, and real-world experience to her work. Podcasting since 2022, Julie's first show, The Story of My Pet, highlights inspiring tales of pets and their parents while advocating for animal rescue, fostering, and adoption. Her latest podcast Your Story Now, features the journeys of female and non-binary podcasters, shares Julie's personal experiences, and provides practical guidance for launching and growing podcasts. As a coach, her focus has evolved to supporting aspiring podcasters as they find their voice and share their message with the world. Julie believes everyone has a story worth telling. Thank you for joining us, Julie.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk with you both about all things podcasting.
I have a few questions to start off with. What inspired you in 2022 to create your first podcast about pets?
So I took my first course about podcasting in 2021. Like many of us, made some shifts in my life and my career post-COVID. And so I was learning a lot about having my own coaching business and, marketing and all the things. And so I had taken a course and I was really interested in it. And I kind of kept trying to get started. And then I realized that at the time I was doing career coaching and I wasn't passionate about it. So I never went anywhere. It just didn't inspire me, motivate me. So in 2022, after probably 6 months of that, I decided to just try it for fun, talk about something I could talk about any day of the week for hours without notes. And that's when I created The Story of My Pet. And it started with me and friends on Zoom sharing stories of pets and childhood and all those things. I didn't edit any of my first few episodes. The sound quality was not good, but it was kind of start messy and see if I even like it before I really dive into it. And that's how The Story of My Pet was born.
Tell us, Julie, what is the story of your pet? Your pet, not
pet.
Everyone else's pet, but your pet.
So I've always been an animal lover. When I was little, I was the girl who wanted to play with the dogs and the cats, not the babies. That was just always who I was. And but also I had animals that I really had special strong bonds with. So one of the story of my own pets I often tell is my childhood dog Champ. So around 6th, 7th grade, I was sick and ended up missing almost a whole year of school. And so I was very lonely. I didn't get to go out with my friends and all those things because I just had no energy. So that's when my parents decided to finally give in to me and allow me to get a puppy. So I got to pick Champ out of a litter. My sister paid $5 for me to adopt him. And he really became my therapy dog. We didn't call it that back then, but I got to, I was with him every day, him growing up as a puppy, and at the time we also had a golden retriever who really mothered him, and so it was just a really great, obviously we bonded a lot. And I didn't realize then, but being sick, teenagehood, high school, college, all the transitions, he was really that one steady focus support I always had. Now, my parents were very supportive too, but we all know pets are different. That bond is different. He always seemed to know when I wasn't feeling well, and he'd either be sitting at the end of my bed, so it was just a bond that I didn't realize how impactful it was until I started reflecting back on it, you know? And a really special story, again, why I love stories and talking about pets. So I lived at home with my parents through college to save money. And then when I was moving away out of town to go to graduate school, we still had Champ. He was still there. He was probably about 12. And so I arrive in actually Alameda is where I moved to, and I'm unloading my things in my new apartment. And I open a box, and there is this tennis ball right behind me was in one of the boxes. So without me even realizing it, at some point, packing up my stuff, Champ dropped one of his precious tennis balls into my box, got packed up, and it wasn't till I opened it that I realized it was there, and it has now come with me over the 20 years since then. So I always tell that story because I think it's important to people to realize how much our pets impact us, but how much we impact them and how important it is to give them everything we can for the best life.
I love that. It's like he didn't want you to forget about him, and this
Right.
was his way of ensuring that you knew that he was still with you.
Yes. It
I
was
love
just
that.
one of those moments where you're like, wait, why is what? Oh. And the sad part is that about actually I don't even maybe 6 months, maybe less. We actually had to put Champ to sleep. So I always feel like he got me through until he knew I was off onto my life and it was okay for him. He had epilepsy since he was about 1, so he'd been
Oh,
on
wow.
medication. And so that started wreaking havoc, but we didn't really start to see it until I left. So luckily, I got to go home and I got to be with him when he went to sleep. And that was just full circle for me to be able to like give back to him after everything he'd done for me.
I love that. I have a question for you. Um, this is a beautiful story. And as a mystic, I believe in science, symbology, things like that. And so the way I'm looking at it is from the woo-woo perspective, Champ is actually taking you through and he's guided through you to this podcast, right?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, so I would love to hear about that transition. What caused you to decide, this is the story is complete and now I'm on to a new story?
Right. That's a good question. You know, I'm as I reflect a lot more back on decisions I've made and things that have happened in my life, and I totally agree we end up where we're supposed to be, but for different reasons than we may realize.
Hmm.
So I mentioned I moved to Alameda, and less than 6 weeks after I moved there, new place, didn't know anyone, going to grad school, 9/11 happened.
Ooh.
So that was another big moment in my life. I ended up leaving that doctoral program at the end of the first year, moving back home, getting a job, and that, shifted my world. And I think a lot of it was because, we all know that experience we had changed our life. And so being alone and not knowing anyone, we crave what we know. And so I think when I started to think about podcasting and I wasn't being inspired, I realized his story meant something and I could share it. And through this whole process of podcasting and storytelling, I've realized that our stories not only may help someone else, but they actually help us process whatever we've been through, whether it's grief or change or loss of something. And so that's kind of been where these little pieces of my history have kind of, I realize, have gotten me to here because it's allowing me over the last few years to process a lot of things I never either didn't even think about it in the way I've thought about it or spoken, out to people about it. And the same is true for my new podcast is I've talked about things I've never, spoken about publicly other than just a friend here or there. So I totally agree. I feel like this whole process has allowed me to be myself more authentically, but it's also getting me into rooms and community and places that I'm supposed to be in. So I really
That's
agree with,
fabulous.
yeah. I I mean, I can be woo-woo, but I'm not. I'm also a Virgo and I'm very logical and I like things planned out and I need to know all the options. But I see how those two can still go together. And even with my logical brain, the universe sometimes says, that's not where you want to be, or that's not where you're needed.
I really think that the world is beginning to recognize that our 100% of the time materialistic explanations for things doesn't actually explain everything. And there are these things that happen that are too weird, too synchronous, too inexplicable to be anything except, something that is coming from an invisible force of some kind or some other. But we could spend forever about that. We can come back to that. I had a question. I want to know, you've interviewed lots and lots of people about their pets. What was one of the craziest animals that that someone talked about as their pet on your show, and what was that story about?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think.
I mean, I know most people have dogs and cats, but probably there was someone with a very obscure animal as a pet, and I want to know what that one was.
It's actually funny because it's actually one of my own stories that's probably, and there's two. Well, first preface with, our fur family, my husband and I, we don't have human kids. We only have fur kids. And I also sometimes say scaly kids so we currently have 3 cats, 2 tortoises, a scorpion, and honestly, I don't even know how many tarantulas at this point. That is my husband's, and he keeps those in his room. So, I am something myself who is open to all types of animals, and I have had people talk about horses, donkeys, things like that. But one of the best episodes I had, I was actually interviewing a couple because they have this great business around pets. And I said something, they say, "Wait, what did you say?" And I said, "Oh, we have a possum." And they were like, "A possum?" So that's a kind of a crazy, funny story I've told. A couple years ago, my husband is a carpenter, but he works for one of our school districts, and he got a call from a custodian. "Hey, there's something in the cabinet." It was a baby possum. They have no idea how it got in there, not near any kind of area where it would have just roamed in. And so he was afraid they were going to hurt it. So he said, "Here, I'll take it." And so he comes home, and not me not knowing, puts it in a big brown box and brings it into me. It was close to my birthday at the time. So he was like, "Happy birthday." And I'm like, "Oh my God, what'd you do? Like, did you give me a kitten?" I open it and it's a baby possum.
Wow.
So William the possum stayed with us for about 9 months. My husband is all about research when it comes to animals, so he learned what foods are best for him, what they need to grow, and as a carpenter, he built this crazy cage for him. But he got to the point once he was full grown, he was restless being inside. So then he built him an outside house in our yard, and in the morning, I would hear them walking and him talking to William. They were having their morning stroll. And unfortunately, one morning he went out to feed him and he was gone. We didn't find him anywhere. He just, I guess, decided it was time for him to move on and find other possums. So that's a story I like to say that really shows people the fact that when I say I'm an animal lover, I mean it. And it's not just like, fluffy kittens and puppies. We really love animals, and anytime we can help one or rescue one, we do that.
It's a way better story than I could have ever imagined. Julie, what a great story.
And it was so funny because I remember my guests, they just kept saying, "Well, what do you mean you have a possum in your dining room?" And it was just, and we laughed, and it was just fun. And I always say the one thing I learned about possum is they're great. They eat all the bugs and things we don't want. And 2, they're a lot like cats. And so as a certified cat lady, we love William.
So, as having a possum, they're nocturnal, right? So, did it affect your, talking about fur babies, did it affect your lifestyle in any way, shape, or form since you had a baby that was, and nocturnal?
Well, since I've always had cats now as an adult, and they can be fairly nocturnal.
that's
And
true too.
we've had those that, 3 a.m. you hear them bouncing off the walls and you're like, what are you doing? But I will say, when he was small and growing, it didn't really affect us because my husband had built this like 4-story condo. He taught him to use a litter box in it. He fed him. He gave him things to climb on. I mean, the whole thing. But what that close to when we moved him outside was that my husband is a sound sleeper and he goes to bed very early because he leaves at 5:30 for work. Well, I'd be shutting down watching TV and then I'd hear all the it was William getting restless. It was nighttime. He didn't have as much space now because he was full grown. And so definitely that's when I would be like, you got to put him outside. You got to create something because he's not happy and he's not making me happy.
Right. Right.
So yeah, for sure. That was an interesting experience as he got older, like what he needed and what he wanted. And it was just I love it. I'm, a learner. I love learning new things. And it was just an amazing experience for us to learn about possums and see that, we'd never forced him to like let us pick him up or anything like that. But when we would feed him or doing things, he'd let us pet him and he was definitely not aggressive. He was confined in a cage so that our animals wouldn't, interact with him. And they would just come along and sniff him or watch him for a little while. So it was really fun to kind of watch that interaction too. But definitely once he got older and I don't know, maybe he was even ready to mate or something, that's when he started making it himself known in the middle of the night.
Yeah. So you found your way from your pet podcast to your new podcast. What inspired the addition of? I mean, Cinthia and I don't want to say it's terrible, but it's a lot of work to make a podcast.
Yes,
and having a second podcast, it doesn't get a whole lot of draft off of the first one. Like it's a lot of
right.
It's a lot more. It's almost double the work, right? Essentially.
Yeah.
And so what inspired you to create a second podcast?
So about 1.5 years ago, maybe a little less, I attended for the first time PodFest, which is an annual podcasting conference. And I really hadn't done anything like that before. Everything was virtual at that point in that world for me. So I got to meet all these people I knew from Zoom and all these other amazing people. And it was that moment where I thought, like, maybe this is where I should be focused. Like, yeah, I can career coach and help you with your resume. But again, I wasn't passionate about it. What didn't excite me. So it was attending that. And then a month or two later, I got to go to Podcast Movement in person. I got a free ticket, which was great. So those experiences kind of made me realize not only how important community is to me and how important it's been for me finding those people as I started my business, as I started podcasting. And I realized there aren't enough communities like that for women. And that's nothing wrong with male hosted shows. I love my larger community with everyone included. But as women, we often talk about different things than what men talk about. And we talk about things differently than men talk about them, right? Me interviewing a woman versus a man, no matter what we're talking about, is a little different. And so it was through those experiences and connecting in person and remembering what that felt like that I decided to shift my coaching to podcasting as well as start a second podcast. I will agree, podcasting is a lot of work. It is not easy. Even if you set yourself up with automation, it still takes work. So I launched and then kind of paused that because I think I'd taken on too much at the time. And I was also still finding myself in the world of podcasting as a coach now. And so that's where Podcast Your Story Now came from. And I am relaunching it's very soon. I have lots of interviews and I'm really focusing on women's voices and women's stories and how important it is to share those, to help others, to help yourself. But also just community. I've realized that more and more of how important community is to all of us, no matter what it is for. And so that side of it, I created the Women's Podcaster Party. And I do free networking monthly for people to just come. And it's for everyone. Even if you've never podcasted, you've never been a guest, come and learn, because there are ways we can tap into that without having to be a podcaster yourself. So that was kind of the evolution over the last year and a half. And ever since I shifted, it's just kind of been like new opportunity, new thing, new people, and so I've really had over and over signs that are reinforcing I made the right decision and the right shift of where I wanted to be, and also where I think where I needed to be able to support other people.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All generated from kind of a visit to podcast festivals in person. Cinthia and I have yet to make it to one. We keep saying we're going to make it to one. We have not yet made it to one, but I think that just means that there's more coming up for us, Cinthia.
Right. Well, actually, so let's say we're your clients because you have so much, information. For all of us out here who want to do a podcast, or they're not really ready to, they're not exactly sure what their voices are. Do you have a
Right.
couple of tips and tricks so that we can, all those people can make their way towards you?
Absolutely. So one thing I always tell people when I meet them and they kind of have these questions is, one, have you ever been a guest on a podcast? And if they haven't, my first thing I tell them, find a podcast to be a guest on. And it doesn't even have to be related to your business or what you want to podcast about. The first time I was a guest, it was on a show. A guy in the UK talked about favorite movies. And we literally spoke for an hour about my favorite movies, and I loved it. And it was so much fun. I'm like, oh my God, this is so great. It was like the connection and the interaction and the sharing passions that made me realize, yes, I like podcasting. So try it, because it's not for everybody. Not everybody vibes in this way or wants to sit in a mic and talk about themselves, or you know what I mean? So I always tell people, start there, test it out, see how it feels, see if you even like it. And then from there, I think that starting a podcast can be an overwhelming process. There are so many options, right? That's what I love about podcasting is you can do whatever you want. Solo, co-host, group, live, recorded, edited, highly edited. I mean, YouTube, not YouTube, whatever. That the starting can be hard because you feel like you have to make so many decisions. So I really tell people to start with your why. Why do you want to have a podcast? What is it going to do for you, your business, your side hustle, whatever that is? Because I get a lot of people that are further down the line of starting, but they haven't really figured that out. And if you haven't, the rest of it's not really going to work. Yeah, you can launch, but is it actually doing what you want it to do? Is it about visibility? Is it about speaking? Is it about, what, using it as a platform to advocate for something? Like you guys said, Story of My Pet isn't really about my business in terms of topic, but it's my passion and I want to keep it going because I'm all about advocating and educating. But also, it's my proof that I know how to podcast, and it's been out this long. It is a top 5% podcast, which I'm very proud of because it's still very small in terms of downloads and all of that. So the two things I always tell people, have you guessed it? If not, start. And two, think about your why and talk through that with someone, because that's really going to help you move to the next step.
Beautiful, beautiful information. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. So tell us, Julie, when are your podcaster parties? Is that something you do every month, or how do people get involved if they want to get involved in the podcaster parties?
Yes, so you can go to my website, juliemartypearson.com. But the Women's Podcaster Party, I have 2 events every month. It does shift because of, various reasons. But yeah, I have a link that I shared with you both that will be in the show notes. And I already have March and April scheduled, and I'll be adding more. So I'm really trying to make it as a regular place for people to come in, meet new people. But I'm also doing a featured speaker, some topic around podcasting. In February, we talked about email marketing for your guests and how to build a good funnel for, having great guests. Next month, we're talking about live streaming. Another month, we're going to talk about podcast websites. So I'm trying to not only give space to network and collaborate, but to give some hot tips from different people I've met in the podcasting industry, because the thing is, it doesn't help anyone to hold on to this information to myself. I want people to learn and grow. So I'm trying to make that a big part of that community too. And I would welcome anyone to sign up for one of our upcoming events.
Outstanding. Well, I've been to one, but it was a couple of months ago, and it sounds like they've gotten even better. So thank you, Julie. Is there anything else you want to share with our guests before we wrap up?
Yeah, I would love to share. I have monthly master classes as well. I offer free classes on how to be an awesome podcast guest, as well as how to be a storyteller that tells compelling stories. And I frame that really in any way, whether it's telling a compelling story in email or blog or podcasting or speaking. I've learned a lot myself throughout the last few years, and I'm just trying to help other people get set up for success in using their own stories as a part of that. So
Beautiful.
Free every month. Check them out. There are different times and days depending on the month, but welcome anyone to join me for those.
Great. Well, thank you for being our guest today, Julie Marty-Pearson on Mind Power Meets Mystic. It's Michelle and Cinthia signing off. Thank you.